All right, I think we can get started. Welcome everybody to the What's New webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the latest Nextflow developer enhancements and also data studios updates. And then also we're going to be talking about the new Seqera AI tools that we've been working on. Thanks for joining. There's many more people joining. I think we have about 35 now, but hopefully more will be joining. And my name is Rob Newman. I'm the product manager lead at Seqera, and I'm joined today by my colleagues, Sasha Dagayev, who's a senior product manager of AI and growth, and Phil Ewels, who's the senior product manager for open source here at Seqera. So first up, before we begin, we're going to go over a few housekeeping rules. All questions should be submitted in the Q&A box, and we'll go over those at the end. And also, please participate in the opening poll that we'll be sending shortly, and also the closing poll before the live Q&A. And lastly, after the webinar's finished, we'll be sharing the recording via email. All right, so to get us started, I'm going to give a short overview on the Seqera product suite and our mission, and then I'm going to present on the recent Data Studios updates. Sasha will discuss how Seqera is utilizing generative AI to lower the barrier to entry for scientists to utilize bioinformatics tools. And finally, Phil will cover how significant improvements to Nextflow are streamlining the developer experience, as well as new features for both Wave and Fusion. And then afterwards, we'll have some time for a live Q&A. Okay, so the Seqera overview. So first of all, a little bit about Seqera. Nextflow is a very important part of the Seqera story. Nextflow is an open source workflow manager, and it was created at the Center for Genomic Regulation in Barcelona about 10 years ago. The creators of Nextflow are actually the founders of Seqera, and the first ever Nextflow commit over 10 years ago was by Seqera's CTO and co-founder, Paolo. So Seqera is really the team behind Nextflow, and many of us contribute heavily to its ongoing development. Nextflow alone is very powerful for writing and running analysis pipelines, but there's so much more that research organizations need to accomplish to scale their research. They need to manage complex infrastructure, their analyses need to be reproducible, they need to collaborate on the development of pipelines, and securely share those workflow results with their colleagues. This is why Seqera was founded, to create our commercial offering, the Seqera Platform, to meet these needs. Additionally, and in parallel, the independent NF Core open source community was established in 2017 to define pipeline development best practices. And although we work very closely with this community, they're not affiliated with Seqera, the company. Fast forward to today, and we see over 2 million Nextflow executions per month. So it's really become the gold standard for bioinformatics workflows. And Seqera's commercial platform has over 120 customers, many of the top pharma, lots of mid-sized biotechs, large institutions like the CDC and Genomics England, and more. At Seqera, our mission is to advance science for everyone through software, to provide scientists with the tools, the resources, the world-class software to move their own scientific discoveries forward. We aim to do this with 3 pillars: build, discover, and scale. First is developing and contributing to open source software so scientists can easily build the analysis tools they need. That, of course, includes Nextflow for writing and running scalable, reproducible pipelines, but also multi-QC for aggregating results and reporting, and Wave, Seqera's container provisioning service for assembling, augmenting, and deploying containerized images. Second is nurturing an open science community. So we not only want the tools to exist, we want to share world-class resources and enable scientists to discover and learn from each other. This is through things like the Seqera pipelines, where you can find off-the-shelf, ready-to-use pipelines, or finding Seqera's very active members in communities like Nextflow, NF Core, and our online community forum. And lastly, we want to enable scientists to really scale their research and their analyses through Seqera's software offerings. The Seqera platform for deploying, launching, and monitoring Nextflow pipelines at scale. We have an add-on product, Data Studios, which I'm going to be talking about for launching interactive analysis notebooks like Jupyter or RStudio. and VS Code interactive development environments. And we also have Fusion for reducing costs and wall time by giving compute resources direct access to data in object storage. Again, the goal with all of these pillars is to ensure scientists have the foundational tools that they need, that they can learn from and contribute back to the scientific community, and that they can scale their research in a way that's easy and, most importantly, reproducible. All right, I'm going to be talking about the latest Data Studios updates. And first of all, I'm going to give it a little bit of a review. As many of you know, the Data Studios private preview was announced by Evan at the Barcelona Nextflow Summit last October. And the public preview was announced in May of this year at the Boston Nextflow Summit. Since July, it's been available for enterprise deployments of the Seqera platform in your own private cloud infrastructure. Data Studios is built on top of Seqera's Fusion file system, which removes the storage I/O bottleneck typical in cloud-native environments. This is done by enabling direct file access to object storage, dramatically reducing the data ingress and egress required, lowering the overall runtime, and making it feel like you're working with a local file system. Using this foundation, we dynamically build containerized interactive environments adjacent to your cloud-hosted data, bringing compute to the data rather than the traditionally time-consuming and costly approach of transferring large volumes of data to your analysis environment, whether that's your local machine or a specifically provisioned virtual machine. We provide container templates that you can build and ship standard tools such as RStudio and Jupyter Notebooks for analyses, or VS Code for development or debugging Nextflow pipelines. And this allows users to directly manage these ephemeral containers on an as-needed basis, reducing costs and management overhead. These standardized environments offer reproducibility and with many additional features for versioning and provenance that I'm going to go into detail on now. Before that, it's actually worth mentioning that even though it's still in public preview, approximately 1/4 of our Seqera platform customers are already using Data Studios. We have tens of new users onboarding every week. We've got actually a nice quote here from one of our early adopters, whose research team is already using Data Studios for their post-pipeline analyses. A typical use case for Data Studios is genomic analysis from data from NGS or arrays, including single cell or spatial transcriptomics. The high-level goal is often to create reports to present to and share with their scientific collaborators. And as of today, about half of our users are running analyses in RStudio using bioconductor packages. Another 30% are running Jupyter Notebooks, and 20% of users are troubleshooting Nextflow pipelines in VS Code environments. The top 3 benefits of using Data Studios that we've heard is the ease of use, setting up a ready-to-work scientific analysis environment, simple and secure access to your cloud-hosted data, and any publicly available cloud storage bucket, such as the Registry of Open Data on AWS, and that other people can collaboratively join sessions or help troubleshoot analyses. So, what have we been working on over the last few months? Well, we've updated the user interface to an intuitive multi-step form with 3 distinct sections: compute and data, where you can define the compute environment, optional GPUs and CPUs, and RAM, and which cloud storage data you want to mount. There's a general configuration step where you can choose the template, define the name, and optionally add a helpful description, and then you can review it in a summary tab. Based on user feedback, we've also added a new add and start button that both creates and starts an analysis environment in one click. The loading page has also been improved with specific messaging that defines the various building and starting steps to ensure that the user is fully aware of all the progress as it's starting up. We've also added a new managed template for Xpra, which is screen for X, which allows you to run graphical-based X11 programs in a container similar to a remote desktop. We've also updated the data mount behavior to allow Data Studios to now mount in a single workspace to mount the same cloud storage bucket, albeit with a warning that you may be potentially overriding your colleagues' hard work. One of the most requested features we've had since the start of the Data Studios project is support for customized environments. As of today, you can now specify a custom Conda environment using your own YAML file, which can be version controlled and centrally managed by your compliance or IT teams. And when added behind the scenes, our container service Wave augments the Data Studios container, essentially building the Conda environment in the container. You can also bring your own custom container, which may have your own proprietary analysis tools or scripts that need to be run as part of your standard analysis process. These custom containers can typically be hosted in any publicly accessible container repository or in a private container registry, such as Amazon ECR. And because Wave is used, we get so many nice features out of the box, including the container file, the container security scan results, the build logs, and the condo log file, which is really important for reproducibility. We've also seen a large demand for adding GPU support to Data Studio sessions, especially with machine learning applications. And as I mentioned earlier, you can now enable GPUs within a session. You do this by simply defining the parent compute environment in the workspace to use GPU-enabled instance families. Then when adding the Data Studio session, you can optionally choose the number of GPUs to allocate to that session, making it much simpler to run intensive analyses such as AlphaFold protein structure predictions. Session checkpointing, which we released earlier this year, allows users to go back in time, take any previous snapshot of a Data Studio session, fork it into a new session, and run any analysis in an isolated environment without impacting the main branch of an existing session. Each named checkpoint consists of all intermediary data and work not explicitly written back to disk, including your notebook configuration, your settings, your dependencies. And a checkpoint is initially created when a session is first started. And then every time a session is subsequently stopped, another named checkpoint is created. The new session can be created also from an existing checkpoint. And these checkpoints can be renamed for easy identification via filtering in the Checkpoints tab. Finally, we have a shiny new dashboard specific to Data Studios, where users can view the status of each session per organization and workspace, which is a proxy for cost estimation. All right, and now I'm going to do a live session demo. So let me jump over to my browser. Hopefully you can all see this. And here we have an organization and a workspace, and we have two running Data Studio sessions. These are both custom environments. You can see I have a Jupyter session and an RStudio session. You can see here, I have a little icon of the template with a little wrench. You might not be able to see that. And this is showing that this was created as a customized image. You can see there's the avatars of that I'm connected to these sessions. And here, if I click Add Data Studios, here I can choose my compute environment. And I have my compute environment here that is a GPU-enabled compute environment. And here I can optionally select the number of GPUs allocated to this. And I can mount my data. And this might take a second to load. Here we go. So I'm going to mount a VS Code S3 bucket. And that's good. I'm going to click Next. And I'm going to choose the VS Code image, which is one of our stock images that we provide. And I'm going to call it VS Code demo. And here is this new button where I can click it and I can install some conda packages. So I'm going to go and grab my configuration file here. And here we have a name for the environment. Here are the channels that I'm choosing to get the packages from. And here I can actually, and additionally to choosing the library, I can actually pin the version of the library that I want. I can also choose to import it from a file if I need to. And then I simply hit Next. And here I have the summary of the Data Studio session. This is what it's going to look like. And if I hit Add and Start, this is now starting up. Okay, so you can see that I'm actually building the container for this Data Studio session. And then I will ultimately be provisioning compute resources and mounting the checkpoints. And this is what I'm talking about when we're actually seeing this feedback on building the session. Now I can go onto the Studio Details page, and this has all the information about the Data Studio session that I've just created. It also has the checkpoint with a timestamp. But importantly, if we go down to the very bottom, we can see the conda packages that I've installed. And especially I can click this build report summary, and this opens up the Wave container status page. So it's telling me that the container's build is in progress. Here's the container file that was used. and the conda file that was used. And when this is finished, it will say the container build is done, and it will actually have the status report. And I'm hoping that will happen and be completed while I'm giving the demo. And here's an example of a Python, a Jupyter notebook. And this was built, actually I can jump back here. And let's have a look at this custom environment, Jupyter custom environment. So here I've installed SAM tools. And I can jump to this. Oh, let me jump to it. Oh, let's dismiss that. And I can run a SAM tools command directly in the terminal in this Data Studio session. And it's pulling that data. Okay, let's see if that container's finished building. Nope, it's still building. So let's jump to the dashboard. Okay, and you can access the dashboard by under the user menu on the right-hand side, go down to dashboard, and then here we have a new Data Studios dashboard. And we can filter by organization and workspace. So we could hide a few workspaces, and hopefully you should have seen this summary view of all the Data Studio statuses updated. So here, this shows the running studios, if there's any that have errored, how many are in a starting state, stopping or a stop state, and then new for the custom environments is if the Data Studio session is being built or it's in a building state, or if the build failed. So we can scroll down here and we can have a look in the workspace where I was actually giving the demonstration from today. We can see we've got 2 running Data Studios sessions, 1 in starting, and the total number is 3. And here I've actually filtered out the Seqera Labs one organization so we don't see them. But now I'm going to hand it off to Sasha, and he's going to talk about the Seqera AI. So let me stop sharing, and Sasha, please take over.
Hey guys, hey everybody. So pumped to be here on this webinar. I wanted to show you guys what we've been working on for Seqera AI. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So this is going to be a fairly interactive conversation. I'm just going to show you guys kind of what we built and 3 kind of key use cases that we think that we can support very, very well with AI. So the primary way, and before we get started, some of you might be asking, hey, Sasha, how do I get to the newest and greatest? Well, if you go to Seqera.io, there's 2 places. One is on the header, and 2 is in the hero right here. So you click Ask Seqera AI, and you'll see a very familiar chat interface. So now let's get started. And this is where some of the differences should become apparent. So initially, if we do things like, hey, can you please pipeline? You'll see the first kind of like departure between us and a lot of the kind of like generic chatbots that you guys might have seen out in the universe. And some of that, the biggest difference is that we're very hooked into the NF Core ecosystem. So meaning that we're pretty opinionated in what our recommendations are. So in this specific use case, you'll see that we actually don't give the user an RNA-seq pipeline code like you might see from other chat experiences. What we instead do is we point the user at NF Core RNA-seq, and we tell them what's a great way to run this pipeline, right? The main reason for this is because we expect that a lot of novice developers, the folks that are just aren't as comfortable yet and want to use AI for a lot of their developer experiences, well, they might not know that these pipelines exist. And this is really where we want them to start. We don't want folks kind of going out there and building a bunch of custom pipelines when something that is well maintained and well well documented exists out there. So this is the number one kind of difference between us and generic chat applications that you guys might see out there. Now, the second use case that I wanted to kind of highlight is essentially letting you know that we're a great AI service for folks that are, I would say, Nextflow curious. So they have pipelines in other languages, but they're curious about Nextflow, but moving that pipeline to Nextflow is kind of a big ask. And so we've designed this chatbot to be really, really good at that. And so let me show you what I mean by that. So here I have a variant calling pipeline that's pretty good from the Broad Institute, but it's written in WDL. And I'm going to just simply take this pipeline and I'm going to paste this in. I'm going to ask, hey, Seqera AI, can you please convert this pipeline to Nextflow? And this is kind of where the biggest kind of like departure is between between the quality of the responses that we give and generic chatbot services. Some of you may have tried things. I'm assuming most people on this call have played around with ChatGPT, and you'll see that for one, it's pretty lacking in DSL2. So a lot of the information, even on the O1 series of models, it still puts out kind of code that is in its training corpus, that is DSL1. And we, as you can see here, we're pretty opinionated and we give you DSL2 that will actually run. The second difference is that you'll see that this code is actually fairly modular, right? This is, again, a stylistic choice that we made with this chat experience. And we try to push the model to be more verbose than others, specifically with, so that way we kind of gather everything that was in this pipeline and actually kind of, like make sure to get everything that's in here. Now, obviously, you can use our chatbot to debug things, to also debug and help your developer experience, but these are just some of the use cases that I wanted to highlight. Now, let's say that you are in your developer journey, you're actually kind of like bought in on Nextflow, right? And you love Nextflow, you've been developing on Nextflow, you love DSL2 syntax, but we also have something special for you too. We have an integration with NF test. So what that means is that if you do things like, hey, can you please write an NF test for the merge? Let's do merge bam outs process. I'm just picking a simple one just in the interest of time. But this is another use case where if you want our AI to help you with writing tests, this is where the AI really, really shines and is going to be, much more, we would say, correct from a perspective of actually running in your system, right? So these are just 3 use cases. It also does very well in the more common use cases that folks are used to, like debugging, like general chat, and just general ideation. But these are 3 kind of like very distinct applications that we wanted to highlight. But that's not all. We also have other functionality within the chat experience as well. So in this use case, I've actually asked it to write me an RNA-seq pipeline. And again, it does kind of tell you, hey, this thing exists called NF core RNA-seq, but you know what? I'm gonna give you the pipeline anyway. And it gives you, very good modular code. And in here you have things like, like the regular process tags. But for process tags that are emitted by Seqera AI, the killer feature here is that we allow in-stream testing. Now, what that means is that we can kick off things in an AI sandbox. So I'm going to go ahead and press this button, and we'll see what happens. So I pressed this button, and right now we've kicked off a bunch of testing to see if this code will actually run. Will it actually execute, right? The biggest problem with a lot of these LLMs is that, they give us code, we don't know if it works, we kind of trust that it works. So in this use case, we're actually trying. But of course, for any good pipeline, it's not just one process, it's several. So let's kick off the test for a bunch of these, and I'll go back to the FastQC to kind of walk you through what's actually happening. So you'll see in the below, it actually starts typing out a lot of what is happening. And what it is that first step one is that it boots up a sandbox environment, an isolated sandbox environment with Nextflow and Wave installed on it. Now, the killer feature of Nextflow and Wave is obviously you can create a you can create a dev environment that will, run most scientific applications. So in this case, it does exactly that. Now, the second missing piece of the puzzle is the samples, right? Because you have this process, right? This FastQC process, and we're testing it. What are we testing it on, right? Well, in this use case, we actually use the NF Core RNA, the NF Core test data sets repository, which is just a collection of over 1,000 small, tiny samples that are specifically created just for the purposes of very quick testing. And so now we get to the fun part of it actually writing the files. And so in here, you can see that the machine, that the AI actually writes this file to the machine. So it takes that same process and it wraps it in a workflow just to test this individual process. And then it runs, and then it actually runs it, right? It actually says, hey, Nextflow run main.nf, and voila. Okay, so now we can be confident that this process will work. Now, we've tested this on a variety of different processes, and yeah, this is a great way to debug and to be sure that things actually work. Now, additionally, we also, for folks that want to kind of like do what the AI just did, but on their local machine, we have another tab called the local testing guide, which essentially gives you a step-by-step instructions on exactly how to do this on your own machine. And so this will say, hey, first make this directory, make these two folders in that directory, download these files. And so these are the files that the AI is using. Write this process, write this workflow, and then write this Nextflow config, and actually run it, right? But as in the beginning, we tested out a fair amount of different processes, and they are still testing. And so we can see here we're testing star, and here we are testing feature counts. And in here, we see specifically with feature counts is when we are working on this, it seems that there is an error with the way that it is actually handling the input files. So then it actually updates the script here, and then it self-corrects, right? And so here, again, is the power of the system, is where we see that these AI systems are able to take in a process and then actually run it and then self-correct and verify that, yes, this does in fact actually run. Now, a note, I'm going to switch to the presentation just to talk through the self-correct feature just a little bit. So the self-correct feature is fairly resilient. This feature can do gives you around 10 iterations to try to kind of fix your code. And so in testing, it can do something around, 10 to 15 iterations of the code to make sure it works. And so eventually it does figure it out. For us, the resiliency we saw is that when we were testing it with DESeq, for example, it went through 17 steps to actually figure out what was wrong with a bit of code that we gave it. So in a word, if you'd like to try Seqera AI, it's available today at seqera.io/askai. And we think that there's 3 specific use cases that it's really, really good at. One is that it's very good at converting any bash / other language scripts into Nextflow. 2 is that we think it's excellent for AI error debugging and code testing. And then 3, where you think that, for folks that do a ton of Nextflow in their day-to-day, this is going to be the best AI experience for you. And that is it. Okay, cool. I'm going to hand it off back to Rob.
Thanks, Sasha. That was awesome. And I'm actually going to hand it off to Phil. So yeah, Phil's our product manager for open source, and he's going to be taking over and talking about the latest Nextflow developer enhancements. Take it away, Phil.
Thanks very much. Still get a shiver down my spine whenever I see those AI demos, such as it's so cool seeing it like figure it all out in real time. Very nice. Yeah, I'm going to do a quick run through of some of the things we've recently launched for Nextflow itself. I'm going to mostly talk about Nextflow. I'm also going to squeeze in a couple of mentions of Fusion and Wave just at the end. But let's start off with Nextflow, which is the main part here. Oops. So Nextflow, I mean, everyone in this webinar already knows what Nextflow is. It's the workflow orchestrator that we're using for deploying workflows. And one of the big things we've launched in the last kind of month or so, basically at the summit, is a brand new language server and VS Code integration for Nextflow. This is a really big deal for Nextflow. It's one of the most significant things we've done and released for Nextflow in many years. And I think it will really change how everyone develops Nextflow code, and hopefully for the better. So I'm going to dive straight into a bit of a live demo here and walk you through some of the things that we can do with this. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. I've got VS Code open here, and I'm going to just quickly generate a new pipeline to play around with here. So I'm going to actually use the NF Core tooling. I'm going to do NF Core pipelines create. This is a newly updated tooling which was shown off by Julian Pedrol actually at the summit. A little terminal interface here, and I'm going to say I want a pipeline, and I'm going to call it webinar. This is a demo pipeline, and I'm going to just run through this wizard, and you can see the different options to throw in here. I'm just going to go through the defaults and click finish, and this will just write like a fully fledged Nextflow pipeline for me, which I can start playing around with straight away. And I'm going to say finish without creating a GitHub repo. Okay. So if I go into the sidebar, you can see I've got my pipeline here, my workflow. And if I open main.nf, you can see this file here. It now says in the bottom footer, it says Nextflow, which shows that VS Code has recognized this .nf file as a Nextflow file, and it started up the Nextflow language server in the background. And VS Code is now interacting with that language server to get all the kind of rich features that we'd expect for a modern coding language and a modern developer experience. So what's different in this file? One of the first things you'll notice is that if I go down here and I jump into a workflow, I can start writing my Nextflow code. And if I start writing code, you'll get this kind of auto-suggest of the different syntax features which are available to me. I could do channel dot, and it gives me all the different possible channel factories in this case. And I can kind of scroll through all of these, and it gives me inline help text about that exact language feature in place without having to go anywhere. So now I don't have to switch back and forth between the docs the whole time trying to figure out what's going on and what the syntax is or remember what that thing was called. I can just see it there and then right in my VS Code editor. Each of these has a minimal documentation, but I can also click read more. So if I go from SRA, for example, I can click read more and it opens it in the wrong web browser. But if I drop over here, then you'll see it drop me straight through to that docs. If I do it from another one, from list, see if it opens it in the right browser this time. Oh, come on. All right. If I've got multiple browser windows open, it's tricky, but you have to take my word for it. It jumped me straight to this header here. And so I can go into the detailed documentation at this basically touch of a button, which is very cool. And as I type, it also gives me help usage about the actual thing. So I can write my channel. I can also then, the language server knows more than just the default language syntax. It also knows about things which are in my workspace. Specifically, I can go to params, and then it gives me a list of all the different parameters which are found in the Nextflow schema JSON file. So if I've generated one of these schema files already, and again, the NF Core tooling will help you with this. You build your parameters, you run NF Core pipeline schema build, and it gives you a whole web interface to write all this metadata and organize your parameters, and it generates that JSON file for you. And it knows all the different parameters here. And as I scroll through these, again, it gives me the help text, which is in that schema file. So it's really easy to work with parameters. And again, you don't have to remember what it was called. You can find it very quickly. The hover help also helps with this. So if I see usage of parameters in the workflow, I can hover over this and it will tell me what the variable type is that's defined in that schema, which again is really helpful when you're kind of quickly working with code. And the same with all the different language constructs. I can hover over this and it gives me help text and shows me how to use that. Really, really helpful. Okay, so if I give this channel a name. Now what I've done here is I've intentionally made a typo. I've called it demos instead of demo. And the two things happen in the editor here. Firstly, I get a red underline here saying that this variable name, which I've called, is not defined anywhere. And secondly, I get an error message, a warning message here saying that I've declared a variable, but it's not used anywhere. This is really the main thing that we built this whole thing for, was to have better error messages. And not only better error messages, which are more specific, but also in place and in real time. I don't have to go off, save my pipeline, do Nextflow run just to find out I've got a typo. I see it right away as I'm writing the code, and I see exactly which characters it applies to. I get rid of the S, and straight away those errors and those warnings go away. This is a huge, huge time saver, and I hope will really reduce a lot of the frustration that some of you may have felt in the past when writing Nextflow code. Certainly, I am quite jealous of everyone who's learning Nextflow now, because I've been writing Nextflow for many years, and really, this is what I've always wanted. Okay, so that's all about writing code, getting inline help and everything. That's great, but what else can we do? One of the other things we find when we're writing DSL2 pipelines, especially with lots of modularity, we can break everything up really nicely, but then you need to know where stuff is, and you find yourself a lot of the time digging through your Explorer here in the side, trying to find all the relevant files. The language server knows all the files in your workspace. It knows how all the imports work, and so that means that you can navigate through your code base very quickly. I'm on Mac. I'm going to hold down the Option key on my keyboard. It'd be Alt if you're on Windows. And I can hover over special things such as this workflow here, and it becomes underlined, and it's a link. So I can click Demo, and it takes me further up this page to where this is defined. So it takes me straight to the definition of that workflow. There's another one here, Demo. This one isn't in the same file. I click that, and it opens up the file which contains that workflow. It works for processes too. So if I click on FastQC, it takes me straight to the FastQC process in its own file. So you can see I've navigated to the relevant code in question, but I didn't have to figure out and reverse engineer how the pipeline was structured. I could just follow the code as I'm reading it, which is really, really fast. If I go back one, this also works on imports. So if you have a big list of imports up at the top, I can hover over any of these and directly go to them. And I can also hover over these import links here as well. So again, if I click there, I go straight to that link. Really, really helpful. VS Code also shows us key information about processes and workflows too. So this is a process here, and if I hover over it, it gives me not the full process information, but it gives me a cut down representation of this process. It shows me the inputs and the outputs, which are typically the most important things to know when you're writing Nextflow code and you're calling this function. You need to know, okay, how many inputs and what are those inputs and what order should they be? So now by hovering over the process, you get that information very quickly. And notice it doesn't have all the stuff like tags and declarations here. It's just the cut down version. And the same is also true for workflows. So if I hover over the demo workflow, again, I can see what the takes and the emits are for that workflow. Right, what else can I do? I can do a few more cool things. I can, if the hover hint is not enough, but I also don't necessarily want to open up a new tab with the whole file in it, I can also peek. So this is a nice little function in VS Code where if I right click an element, I click peek and I can do peek definition. And this opens up this little kind of sub window within the editor showing that different file and showing that code. And again, it's highlighted here. This is really, really useful. And you can also look at where things are being, so if I open up the process in another file, I can also peek to where it's being called. So I can peek references. And this shows everywhere in the whole project where this particular process is being called. So it shows the imports, it shows where it's being called, it shows all the channel outputs which are being used in place. So it's, again, a really fast way to navigate your way around, and it even works with processes that have been aliased to a different name and things. Okay, and last bit of this is maybe I decide that I don't want this to be called FastQC anymore. I would actually like to call it something else. I can, this is the riskiest part of my demo. Let's see if it works. I can go to rename symbol just by right clicking on it there. And then I'm going to type this to webinar, hit enter, and that will go through and it renames through my entire code base FastQC to webinar. Really much faster, more effective, and less bug prone. So you can rename symbols like that way, and it does it in your whole base, code base. Okay, we're doing well. The syntax, the language server also knows, because it understands all of the code in your project, it builds up a whole AST and abstract syntax tree of your entire code base. That means that the language server can also think about how your code is formatted. So any of you coming from the world of Python, for example, where you may be used to auto formatters such as black or rough, you'll be very happy. I know I was. But we now have an auto formatter for Nextflow code. This is, again, is something I've been requesting for many years. So if I just, try and remember the syntax, the shortcut key to really mess up all the formatting on this file, I've just got rid of all indentation throughout the whole file, so it's just flattened. I can now open up a control panel. I've got live demo, and I can't remember any of my keyboard shortcuts. Okay, shown run commands. I can click format document up here. I don't know why I can remember the shortcut key. Format document, hit enter, and that asks the language server to reformat all my code with indentation, and I get beautifully formatted code. This is really good not only to save you time, but also to save on arguments. Anyone who knows a black formatter will know it's the motto there is any color you like as long as it's black. And what this does is it enforces a standard for code formatting. It means that everybody who's using a formatter formats their code in exactly the same way, using the same indentation, the same style. And that's great because you don't have to think about it. You can set VS Code to format on save. So it's just always formatted in the same way. And also it means when you're doing pull requests and working collaboratively, you don't see loads of diffs to do with white space everywhere. You don't hit save on a one character typo and get all the trailing white space cut off, for example. You get just a diff of the actual thing you changed. So it's really a much more streamlined way to develop, especially collaboratively. Okay, two more things. Firstly, I showed earlier that there was a warning, an underlying warning. Now, one of the things you can do here is you can tell VS Code to show you all of the warnings like that in your entire project. And if I go down to the toolbar at the bottom here, you can see there's something here saying how many errors and warnings I've got, and I've got 21 warnings, which is a bit overwhelming, especially because I've got VS Code zoomed in quite high here. So if I bring this tab up, you can see these are all the different warnings throughout the entire project. Some of these are because the VS Code plugin is still a little bit young, and the language server doesn't really know about plugins yet. So we've got some special configuration here that's due to the NF validation plugin, which is not recognizing. Here it's giving me a warning that I've defined a variable name, which is not being used. So it's that same error prefix we saw earlier, but it's also telling me how to fix this warning, where if I just prefix that with an underscore, the warning goes away. So when you first use a VS Code extension, it's quite likely you open your project up and you'll see a lot of stuff like this, but you can kind of work your way through and it's pretty quick to resolve all of this stuff. And the reward for doing all of that once you've gone through is you get some really nice features such as this little preview DAG button, which shows up above a workflow when you don't have any syntax errors. And I can click that and it shows me a DAG just of that specific workflow. If I go down to another one down here, I get a slightly different DAG. And if I go to this workflow, I get a slightly different DAG again. Really nice little feature to help you understand the code that you're looking at in your VS Code integration. Okay, if you want to read more about this, we've got a blog post that went out a couple of weeks ago, going through some of the same stuff in written format. It's nice to kind of share with colleagues. Also in the documentation, if you go down to developing pipelines, you'll see we've got a section now on VS Code integration, which explains all about this, how to use it, where to get it, and so on. And something I haven't talked about so much now, but will be a focus of our next webinar in December, is that with this new language server, we're also starting to think hard about what the Nextflow syntax itself looks like. We're moving away from this paradigm of Nextflow being a groovy DSL to Nextflow really being a first-class programming language in its own right, and making much more intentional decisions about how the Nextflow syntax looks. Some of this is starting with some of the early warnings which are being used by the language server. So it's a great way to be aware of future upcoming depreciations before they're enforced. And there's also some documentation here on the left under reference and syntax. New syntax documentation that tells you all about what valid Nextflow code looks like. And right at the bottom has a section about upcoming depreciations, which you might be good to be aware of. There we go. So you can see here. Really good page to be aware of, and more on that soon. All of this code is open source. We've got on GitHub the language server repo and also another repo for the VS Code extension. So if you'd like to see this in your own editor, maybe you don't use VS Code, hop in there, start chatting on this issue, number 56, about adding support to Vim or Emacs, whatever your IDE of choice is. And because the language server is a standard, we can start to bring all of this code intelligence to other IDEs as well, using the same code backend. Right. I'm going to hop back to my slides now. That's all for Nextflow. I'm going to quickly mention a couple of new things to do with Nextflow and Wave in the final couple of minutes. And like I say, if you're interested in the Nextflow stuff, join us for the next webinar where Ben and I will go through the back end of how this works in a lot more technical detail. Also talk about some of the upcoming syntax changes. Yeah, and also some of the upcoming features, which I haven't really touched on today. Okay, Wave. So for anyone not familiar with Wave, this is another open source tool we've developed at Seqera, which is all to do with provisioning Docker and Singularity images. So basically you can pass just a conda package to Wave and it will build it on demand for you just in time. And it also does a whole load of other things to do with Docker images and software containers, which are useful for you as pipeline developers. One of the things we launched at the summit the other week is this idea of container mirroring. We've previously had a similar thing where Wave could rebuild your image and put it in this, save it to a registry. But now Wave can explicitly mirror images without adjusting the contents to another registry. So this is great if you are running on a different cloud region or in a different cloud, and you don't have to update your pipeline anymore to change the base registry and all that kind of stuff. You can just tell Wave, I want to pull my images from this Docker registry, which is close to me. Wave will, on the fly, fetch all the containers which are referred to in the Nextflow pipeline, push them to your registry of choice, and then use those for the pipeline execution. So that means you don't, and once they're there, they'll be stored there forever. So the next time you run a pipeline, it will just grab them directly. This means you can save quite a lot of money, things like data egress, and you can work locally, but also with very little effort on your part in terms of configuration. Nice little feature, which will hopefully help some of you. And something else we released was to do with security scanning. So Wave runs a security scan using this open source tool called Aquatrivi whenever it builds a container. And we're updating how that works so that you can tell Wave to always rescan the image every time it tries to pull. This is important because maybe the image may have been built 6 months ago, and new security vulnerabilities may have come out since then. And so it's good to be able to repeat scans kind of over time as time goes on to detect any new or novel vulnerabilities. This also comes with new functionality within Nextflow and also the Wave CLI, where you can tell Nextflow or configure Nextflow to fail if any security vulnerabilities are found which pass a certain threshold. So you might say, I don't want to run if there's any high consequence vulnerabilities, and Nextflow will crash with an error. And therefore, every time you keep running your old pipeline, which is well known, well standardized, you haven't touched anything in your pipeline, if new vulnerabilities come out, which are high security risk, then your pipeline will stop failing, it will stop running, and it will give you an error so you can go and sort that out. So especially people working with sensitive data, this can be really, really good. Okay, final bit, last couple of minutes, I just quickly want to talk about Fusion. This one is not open source, it's a commercial tool developed by us at Seqera, but it sits and works with Nextflow pipelines to optimize file transfers, especially in the cloud. The big new feature which was launched at the summit is this thing we're calling Fusion snapshotting. The idea here is that most people running on AWS will be using AWS Batch. And by far the cheapest way to do this is by using spot instances, where you bid for the lowest prices on the spot market. That's great. It's much, much cheaper than running on demand. So that's basically what everyone should do. But the problem is that, especially as the spot market has become much more competitive in recent years, AWS can terminate the instances that your jobs are running on. And that's a particular problem if a job has been running for a long time and it has to be restarted, and it can end up costing a fair amount of money if you have a lot of retries. The idea of Fusion snapshotting, we've got Fusion running within this task here, is we get advanced notification of that the instance is going to be shut down. And Fusion is able to grab a snapshot of the running task, save it to disk, and put that into an S3 object, which is stable and permanent and survives the termination of that instance. Then when we have another instance which we're able to restart, a totally new instance, Fusion can restore that snapshot back onto the instance and carry on from where it left off. So now you don't have to restart the failed task from scratch, you just carry straight on. Saves a lot of money and a lot of time. So we're able to detect a spot interruption, continue from where it was interrupted, and this makes the usage of spot instances on the AWS market much, much more efficient, and basically there's no reason not to use them now. Really big news for everyone using AWS. This is very new. We've just released it as a private preview for AWS. So if you're an AWS user, please do use this QR code to get into touch with us, or tell us in the poll at the end of this talk, and we'll talk to you about trying this out and testing it. And in the future, we will add support to Google Cloud and Azure, but it's not ready yet. Okay. As a recap of what I spoke about then, Wave is getting better and better at security and also mirroring images. Nextflow has a new language server and a new VS Code integration, and Fusion snapshotting will hopefully change the way that you use spot instances. And with that, I will pop back to the main slides and open up the poll, which I think should appear in Zoom in just a second, where if you are interested in that private preview of Fusion snapshots, there you go, it's just popped up. Please click yes, and we will get in touch with you. And with that, happy to take any Q&A. I think I'm going to run, so maybe Rob and Sasha, you guys can unmute yourselves. That would be great. And we'll start firing some Q. I've seen a lot of questions come in already, and I think quite a few have been answered in text already. And I'm going to give one to Sasha and Rob while I read up on the others. Some of these have been answered already, but I'm going to just throw them out anyway. There's a good question here, Sasha, for you. How does the Seqera AI know which test samples to run the test workflow on? How does it know which data to use?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is kind of building on top of
a lot of what is in the test data sets repository. Each of those samples has a generated description. And so we use the large context windows to select the most appropriate sample based on the context of the question answered and the process in which it's being run.
Very cool. There's a question here about using Fusion. So the question is, can Fusion be used for non-Nextflow pipelines or just any arbitrary workflows? The short answer for that is no. Fusion is specifically designed to work with Nextflow. That's part of the reason that it gets such good performance, is we can make certain assumptions about how the data access works. But there are other comparable tools which do work with non-Nextflow jobs. There's plenty of options for you if you're running things on cloud which are not Nextflow. There's a question here, can auto formatter be invoked programmatically so it can be added to a pre-commit hook? Yes, that was actually on my kind of roadmap slide, which I skipped over pretty quickly. What's coming for this is that much of the language server is going to be integrated into the main Nextflow CLI tool. At the moment, it's standalone. And with that, we will have new Nextflow commands, probably called Nextflow format and maybe Nextflow test or lint or something. So you'll be able to get all of those warnings and errors on the command line, and you'll also be able to format the code on the command line. And the explicit intention for that is to be able to use it in things like pre-commit for continuous integration tests. So there's another question about AI here. Can it be used for doing code review of Nextflow pipelines?
Yeah, so right now, one of the things, so yes, you can paste in your pipelines into the chat interface and ask for opinions. We're working, we're working on other interfaces outside of chat to kind of make that interaction a little bit more natural. So stay tuned for that. But it's very good at kind of like giving feedback, especially to pre-made to pipelines that you may already have.
Roast my pipeline. Rob, I've got one for you about data studios that's come up here. The new language server we've been talking about, is that included in data studios if you load up I think you were showing VS Code in your demo there?
Yeah, absolutely. It comes as part of our container template image. So it's already installed. So everything that you saw with Phil's demo is available if you're running Visual Studio Code inside of Data Studios.
Great. And I think there was another related question about installing the VS Code extension as well. As this Anand said, you can install that through the extensions page in any running VS Code, and you can also grab it via the marketplace website. So there's links in the docs for that. One for you, Sasha. Does Seqera AI, do you train on my data?
No. So the simple answer is no. We're coming out with a trust page that is going to outline kind of how our application works. So it's just not out yet. We're working to kind of push that out as quickly as possible. But the short answer is no.
Okay, last couple of questions because we're running out of time. There's a question here. Can the Seqera platform be installed on a local server? So Seqera platform is a commercial product, and you can either run the cloud instance, which is hosted by us, but there's also an enterprise version, which you can install on your own in-house infrastructure. So basically, yes, a local server. If you're interested in that, check out seqera.io, and on the product page, you can find more information and get in touch with us. If I missed any. Oh yeah, last one on a similar-ish kind of note. Sasha, is Seqera AI a paid tool?
No, so it is not a paid tool. Anyone can use it. If you go to seqera.io/askai, it is free. We reserve the right to kind of meter based on demand, and it will always be at least free to try.
Brilliant. Okay, we're a bit over time, so although I'm quite enjoying this Q&A, I think we should probably wrap up. Everyone who hasn't had a question answered, will try and get back to you after the webinar finishes. I've got a couple more slides here. So I think there's going to be a poll popping up now. there you go. So if you'd like to hear more about, hear more from us about any of the things we've talked about today, or anything else to do with Seqera or Seqera Platform, fill in that little poll and we'll get back to you. Also, much of the stuff we talked about today was launched at the recent Nextflow Summit in Barcelona 2024. I know that some of you in the audience were there in person, so sorry for any repeated content. But if you're interested in this stuff, do check out summit.nextflow.io, also the Nextflow YouTube channel. Every single talk was recorded. You can view all of the content there online. The Summit website has all the abstracts and information about the speakers as well. So go and have a look, and there's some really fantastic talks there. I'm hoping that we'll get also a podcast out. We have a Seqera Nextflow podcast. I'm hoping we'll have an episode out pretty soon where we talk through some of the highlights from the different talks there as well. So that's also something to look out for. We also have the next webinar, which I mentioned, coming up in a couple of weeks, December the 10th, where Ben and I will talk in more detail about VS Code driven development and syntax enhancements. So we're going to talk through some of what the future holds for Nextflow syntax, with this bright, shiny future we can do now that we've unlocked this superpower with the language service. So if you're interested in that, please do join us. It should be a lot of fun. With that, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. We'll share a recording of this webinar pretty soon, as we've edited it, so it will be available for you to rewatch. And thank you very much for spending your time with us.
Thanks all.
Bye, everybody.